Welcome to the Paru Zings Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome back. We are excited to have another fascinating and informative Perusing's The Power of Values episode. We're grateful for our guest, Shawn Telford. Shawn, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here, man. Excited to have a nice conversation.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. And we want to thank all those that have reached out. Thank Winnie and thank Johnny. Thank Peter, as well as a couple others. We appreciate you reaching out. Thanks for sharing the feedback. Thanks for sharing how it's helped give you some perspective, provide you a little possibility, and sometimes some even hope in some difficult or challenging markets, and perspective on greater opportunities you might even want to consider that you didn't even know existed. They come about through the thoughtfulness and generosity of others, just giving us a little peer view, a kind of a peering into what their yellow brick road in the industry has been. So, Shawn, as always, real quick, everybody, if you haven't, please go ahead and not only like this recording on the platform that you're listening to, but also make sure to continue to share it. It's wonderful when people are like, wow, I didn't even know this existed. I've gone back and listened to like the past 2 seasons. So, Shawn, we always have the first question, which is, so were you born this way, or how did you get into the appraisal and valuation profession?
Oh yeah, that's I've heard that question before, and it's a fun question to answer. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here and chat. So my story is a little bit interesting. So I'll start with the way back.
Yeah.
So how appraising entered our family was my father was in college at BYU in Provo, Utah, and he needed a job, of course, young married with children.
Yes.
And so he walked down to the bank, where he saw a teller job, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that we filled that job, last week, but they're hiring appraisers upstairs." And he's like, "What's an appraiser?" This is 1969, so
Wow.
it's a ways back. So that's how he stumbled into the profession, and he did it. He did appraising on and off, kind of part time for his whole career. He was an entrepreneur, had many other jobs, but how I ended up in this was I was in college, and he was just still doing appraisals just for the FHA rotation roster back in the day. So you do one, turn it in, you get another. So he was just doing that on the side for just because he was doing other things. And he got real busy because of this was like 1990. Well, I'm gonna get my math all messed up. Would have been 92, 93. He got real busy.
Yep.
And he's like, "Come work for me." And I was just going to college and making $5.25 an hour minimum wage at the time. And
Got it.
I thought, why not? I can drive around and take pictures of houses. And so that's how I stumbled into it. And, very quickly I realized, hey, I could do this. I'll jokingly say it's just filling a form out. How hard could it be? And I
could drive by and take a front photo of the house.
To fill out a form, but I clearly did not know what I didn't know at that point. But at that point, I went ahead and got my initial license at the time and started down the path. So
you technically started out in a bit of a family business, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. It was Dad was he kind of switched at about the time I started. He switched to doing appraising full time because there was so much demand at the time, and I remember he had 50 or 60 orders at any given time, waiting to be done. So anyway, that's how I stumbled in.
That's amazing. I'm sure some people right now wish they had 50 or 60 orders sitting in front of them for something to do.
Oh yeah, those are the days.
Were the days. Wow. So what was it like? I mean, I imagine, since you mentioned your dad was kind of doing some appraising amongst other endeavors on and off, so you were kind of surrounded by some property and valuation conversations growing up, I gather.
Yeah, we real estate was always part of things we did in the family, whether it was owning, my dad before it was cool and they made videos about it, he would flip properties.
Oh, wow.
And so we'd go out as a family he'd buy these junker houses, and we'd go as a family. I had 4 siblings. So the 5 of us and mom and dad would go, and we'd gut these houses out. And, I didn't realize what was going on, of course, but we dealt with real estate in that manner. And then my father also was involved in title companies.
Wow.
And so he was an agent at a couple of different title agencies. Mm-hmm. And so I was very familiar with it, and he seemed to always be involved in those sides of the business. So it was, we had a lot of discussions over the years and about real estate. And I quickly understood that it was a good way to make money. You had to be smart.
Yes.
But there were a lot of different angles you could play in real estate. So I always found real estate to be fascinating, and it kept my interest. And it's that's how I ended up in this business.
That's phenomenal. And you've been around obviously real estate and valuation for a while. Did you follow in your dad's footsteps and get into the fix and flip stuff, or did you just, hey, I started taking photos for Dad back in the 90s and then been around valuation ever since?
I didn't follow the same path. So I became licensed or certified in, I think, probably the early 90s, and I was married at the time, and kind of went on my own. Dad was doing his own thing, so I went out kind of on my own.
Okay.
And within a couple of years, early 90s still, mid 90s, my wife's like, this isn't going to work, you being in the house all day working. You need to go either find a place to work or get a job. And I'm like, I have a job, but it was kind of a funny discussion. But so I went out one day looking for a place to rent, where it was just me at the time, but I thought, I'll find a couple of people to work with me. And anyway, while I was looking for the places, I had the idea. I thought, I wonder if there's any like staff appraiser jobs.
Oh, wow.
So I looked in the paper back when we actually looked in the paper for ads. Cool. And I saw a job at Washington Mutual Bank in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
An appraiser, staff appraiser. I'm like, well, how fortuitous. So I applied on a whim.
Yep.
And a few months later, they hired me.
Oh, wow.
And so I ended up transitioning from an independent fee appraiser to a production appraiser at Washington Mutual in, I think that was 1998.
Late 90s. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So that was my next path into the banking world. And,
sure.
And I really enjoyed the working at the bank. You saw a different side, as a production appraiser there. And then I eventually became a reviewer, a staff reviewer.
Got it.
So you got to see, hundreds of different appraisers work from across the Western U.S. At the time, WAMU was a very large wholesale and correspondent lender. And so that was eye-opening to me about the how much I didn't know about valuation and the profession. And I liked being in the corporate world. It's a different cadence to it. So I really enjoyed that. But then that also sent me on, became evident to me at that point that I didn't want to do that the rest of my life.
Okay.
That I became very keenly aware that technology was going to have a huge impact on, the world or appraising in general. Not that I was any like great prognosticator at that point, but this is the late 90s, and the internet and the technology is really just starting to get hold of things. And so that sent me down the path to get more education, and I got a master's degree in information systems.
Oh, okay.
So that I wanted to be on the tech side of the valuation world and kind of go down that path, because I really like real estate valuation, but I also wanted to be part of technology.
Very, very prudent choice you made there, moving into information systems and approach. I'm curious, for those that maybe like you as well, had an opportunity to kind of start out. Did you get much support either from your dad or others being new in the profession? I know a lot of people don't. I don't know if you had any of those opportunities back in the early 90s.
I would say, my dad had praised for his whole, career, as I mentioned, on and off.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that he, was like a student of the profession. He knew how to run it as a business.
Yes.
Really well, was very successful. He knew how to do appraising really well for the residential side, for what the agencies and FHA and all those guys were looking for. And he'd worked at banks as a manager of REO, and during the savings and loan fiasco, he was at a savings and loan and dealt with all that stuff, firsthand, as a bank executive, in that type of that part of the business. And so he had a great knowledge. So he was very supportive of me, finding my own path, but I think I quickly exhausted his knowledge of appraising. And so I by going to the bank, the Washington Mutual experience, that was fabulous, because then you're on a team with, 8 or 10 appraisers that are local, plus my opportunity to interact with, dozens, if not more, of the appraisers we utilized in the state of Utah and elsewhere. Just, it gave me a huge, broad education,
yes,
as to how the system really works, and probably more importantly, how appraising fits into the big picture. It's just one of many things that are part of the risk management process. And it's important, but, I think we have to be thoughtful. It helped me to be thoughtful of the relative importance of that in the big picture. So it was very educational in that way.
That's fantastic. And it is helpful to gain perspective, so you both can weigh out the importance, but also sometimes it's like, things, maybe it's not so important, across different, like, is this really, sometimes as they refer to it, the hill to take your final stand on. It's like, probably
Exactly.
not, like, let's just take a step back,
Exactly.
take a picture of things.
Exactly. It's, I was very young at that time. So I was probably in my, let's see what I've been in, probably like 30, late 20s,
Yep.
early 30s. So I'm young and still thinking I know more than I do. And I can recall several instances of calling more seasoned appraisers up and telling them what I thought of their appraisal and asking them for corrections, and them politely and gently educating me that I didn't know squat, and I need, and in fact, most of the times I probably didn't.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot from those types of interactions.
Wow. How did the type of appraisal work you were doing when you were independent versus being production with a bank, with Washington Mutual at that time, how did that change? Or was it pretty much still the same thing? One was just you were on your own, and the other, now you're working for an employer.
The work that I did on my own was, I would say there was a lot less variety to it. You're getting the typical 1004 work in given geographies, because back in those days you had direct relationships with the independent mortgage brokers who would order from you. And so it was a combination of you needed to be in their office and earn their business from being reliable and performing. So that it was a different type of work when at the bank, because at the time Washington Mutual was very aggressive in employing, what we're calling these days appraisal modernization,
Yes.
exteriors and appraiser assisted AVMs. Well, the bank was using all those back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so I got exposed to that early. And so I saw lots of different types of assignments, and I learned how those assignments were based on the risk for the bank, because the bank would hold a lot of its loans on portfolio,
Yes.
They could choose the appropriate level of valuation, and they didn't need an appraisal on everything. An AVM was sufficient in certain categories, and as well as a drive-by, type work. So I think I saw a lot wider variety of assignments, with respect to the type of assignment, not so much the types of properties, but more the type of assignments.
That's a fascinating one. What for those that have never had the opportunity to visit Salt Lake or spend any time in Utah, what did the normal housing, or in this case, property assignments kind of look like? Is it just like you got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath kind of place, or you got some special homes? Help people get a picture of a Salt Lake City.
Sure. So Utah, as we were talking, as we kind of led up to the podcast, it's not there's not a lot of old housing stock there. It was basically settled in 1850-ish, and so most of the housing stock, I would say, was newer. And so you saw a lot of your traditional ranch rambler home. Pretty much everything has a basement. It was an oddball to not have a basement.
Got it.
A lot of subdivisions, but also a lot of just custom built homes on lots throughout the area. I worked in what's referred to as the Wasatch Front, which is the communities that are up against the mountains there that range from really Ogden, Utah on the north to Provo, Orem on the south end of that corridor. And, they're just a wide variety of homes, from your old 100-year-old bungalow to, your, run-of-the-mill split entry to the ranch and ramblers. And then there's a lot of, because of the views, the topography of the area, you have what are known as the foothills or the benches.
Yes.
And these are the areas that are up against the mountains where you can go up a little bit and have a beautiful view back over the valley and such. And so on those, in those areas, you saw a lot more custom built homes, as people with means would build those. So you saw a wide variety of homes. And then, the other part that was interesting to me was you had the mountain communities. So once you get up into the mountains, you'd have a lot of cabins, homes that might be used, just for the summer vacation or the winter, snowshoe in or ride the snowmobiles in kind of thing. Wow. So there was a lot of those types of homes that were, could be a log home or an A-frame or something unique with sometimes they'd have electricity run in and water, and sometimes they wouldn't, that kind of scenario. And then of course you had the areas like Park City, where you have just, tremendous variety of homes that are very valuable. Lots of condominiums. At that time, they were. I remember coming across the first condotel that I'd ever seen this was in the early 2000s, and so you started to see that kind of stuff. So there a very wide variety of housing in Utah.
That's a helpful picture for people that don't have a sense of that, especially if they're maybe in more of the flatland, as others might refer to it, and this idea of a view. And they're like, you mean looking at the property across the street isn't a view? You're like, no, we're talking much greater vistage when you have that ability to be, partway up the foothills, what have you, be in the
exactly,
and have that sense of seeing sunrises and sunsets or what have you.
Yep.
Oh, that's phenomenal. How big of a geography did you cover when you became a production appraiser as opposed to when you were on your own?
It would vary depending on how busy the bank was.
Oh, okay.
So, on my own, you're a little less picky, yes. and you go where your clients ask, and so I would do work even that might be a couple hundred miles away in Utah in communities that were a little isolated. And, I enjoyed that work because you'd have to go down there and familiarize yourself with the community, and you couldn't just pop in and out because the dynamics of the markets were so different than they might be up on the Wasatch Front. So I enjoyed that variety of work on my own. As in a production scenario for the good of the bank,
Yeah.
They're paying you a salary, and so they want you to maximize your output.
Yeah.
And so the smaller the geography, the better. And so we would, as we had, I can't remember how many staff appraisers, we might have had 4 or 5 in the Salt Lake area, but we would divide our areas up to where, we could have a pretty not concise, but a pretty defined area that really didn't require a lot of travel between properties. So it was definitely a smaller area when I worked as a production appraiser at the bank.
Yeah. And then what do you reflect on as how your knowledge of both appraising and maybe the industry in general changed as you got into reviewing from being on the production side? Many people, myself included, have seen that that's a transformational experience. As well.
It was. I mean, it's night and day. You go from working with Dad, who, like I said, knew what he was doing, and a few other appraisers that we'd worked with, the handful of folks that you meet in the classes, your CE and so forth. But
yes.
So I was still very young in the profession, I think, at that time. So, starting to review the work of other appraisers, when I'd only been in the profession for, maybe 5-7 years,
yes,
was enlightening. To me, it that awareness combined with the understanding of how a bank worked and the lending process, from underwriting to front end policy and risk management, was just it opened my eyes to the big picture. It took away I would say that I was very ignorant to those things prior to working at the bank. So for me, that was a really good experience that helped expose me to the things that I wanted to do with the rest of my career, which were more in the policy making, the understanding of the big picture, the oversight of the industry and the profession, combined with how technology would fit into all that. So it really pushed me in that direction, where otherwise, had I not worked at the bank, I probably likely would have just continued to appraise independently, or, maybe formed a small firm. I mean, who knows? But I'm glad I ended up on the path with the bank. It was a very good thing.
That's fantastic that you got the opportunity going from production to get into review. Did you stay in review, or did you when you were still Washington Mutual, or how did your experience progress there?
When I spent a couple of years as a production and a couple of years as a reviewer.
Got it.
And that was the time when I went back to school and finished my degree in technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I finished that master's degree, I immediately wanted to transition to the technology side of the bank. And so I knew that I needed to find an opportunity to move to the tech group in the bank, but stay with appraisal. And for me, it was fortuitous again that the bank was in the middle of installing a new technology platform from a vendor, and it was to manage the appraisal process. And they were the first pilot of this was going to be at the offices in Southern California.
Oh, okay.
And so I saw there was a job opening in Southern California at this appraisal resource center, they were calling it, for a staff reviewer. And I thought, man, if I get down there, I can perhaps weasel my way into the tech stuff. So I basically took a lateral transfer on a real short notice. And fortuitously for me, the person managing that group had also been my manager in Salt Lake for a time.
Oh, okay.
So I called them up, and they were they were excited to have me come down there.
Sure.
So we moved my family to Southern California, and I started working as a reviewer, deploying the system. And as the system was being deployed, as you can imagine, there were a lot of issues initially and things to learn. And I worked closely with the tech team, and I, of course, always was dropping hints that, hey, I'm finishing a degree, or I just finished my degree in information technology, and within like 4 months, I was on the tech team.
Oh, good for you.
So they transitioned. I transitioned from being the reviewer to working on the tech team, and then that launched my career vector at WAMU to entirely shift to the tech side of appraisal. So that was a great opportunity, and so that's how I finished my career at WAMU, basically running the tech side of the appraisal department. I think we had somewhere between 500 and 700 staff appraisers. So I was responsible for the technology that they were utilizing, as well as the system that we had installed from the vendor to manage all of the appraisal. We were doing hundreds of thousands of appraisals a month through that system, from the production appraisers that's in the bank, as well as the wholesale and correspondent channels. So it couldn't have worked out better for me if I had designed it in the opportunities to still be involved with the valuation and the profession, but also really get to be in the tech side.
That's phenomenal. And to help people kind of get a sense of approximately 20 years ago, when we're talking about this idea of technology and moving from reviewing into that whole architecture that supports that kind of volume. Because it's one thing to, as you mentioned, be an independent professional and handling some workload. It's another to be a professional that's part of a team handling a workload. It's quite another thing to have hundreds of thousands of assignments flowing through and actually have a systematic and generally how do we nicely want to put it? Not too complex of a process to get things done where people are both informed and involved. What was that like in terms of that evolving technology 20 years ago?
Yeah, that was it, if you can remember back, or some people may be too young, but email was just starting to be a thing.
Yes.
That was like in the late 90s. People were just starting to get accustomed to email, and the whole idea of a PDF, yes, and delivering an appraisal. I remember before we installed the system at WAMU, I had been pushing for us to start letting appraisers email appraisals to us.
Oh,
and
wow.
the big thing was our department was like, well, the photos, how are we going to get the photos to be color? And I'm like, and just stuff like that was just so, and signatures, people were like worried about things that we just don't even worry about now because it was so new. I mean, the bank didn't even have its own email accounts or internet, right? They just didn't exist.
Yep.
And so, anyway, I could go on for that all day, but, the WAMU was innovative, very innovative in embracing technology for appraisal. At the time, the chief appraiser was a lady named Sue Pottinger, and she saw the benefit of being involved in that tech. And so she, with the vendor, a company called FNC, mm-hmm, had worked very aggressively to try to build out this tech and to put in place the infrastructure that we now kind of consider normal, which is transmit an appraisal as data.
Yes.
That was a unique and entirely new idea then. And of course it was scary to appraisers too.
Oh yeah.
So that was really fun to be involved with that, but it was probably more fun to see how, it enabled the Washington Mutual in many ways at the time was one of the largest lenders in the nation, if not the largest, to successfully keep up. I mean, with the process. So it changed everything overnight. I remember one of the big wins I remember when we installed the tech was just to pay the bills, just to pay the appraisers' invoices. Our accounts payable group, if memory serves, and it's a little fuzzy now, they had 12 FTEs, 12 full-time employees that just manually took the paper invoices and cut checks. And when we installed the system and were able to transmit a data file nightly, the accounts payable guy was he was so happy and excited. I remember him because simple little things like that. And that's just one of 1,000 different little things. But it was a big win in how you can automate the process and simplify it. So I consider myself extremely fortunate to have been at the forefront of all of that and being exposed to the thinkers and the smart people who had could see the vision of how the technology could streamline the collateral valuation. Because no one disputes, even today, no one disputes the absolute importance of valuing the collateral and understanding that. That's part of the whole equation of risk management.
Yes.
But it's also just absolutely clear that you can do that collateral valuation in many, many different ways that do and do not involve an appraiser. And you can do it successfully. And so I'm, of course, big on the appraiser being involved. And that's one of the things I really try to push these days is appraisers are going to have to evolve how we fit into the puzzle. And if we don't focus our energy on the right parts of the equation, the appraiser profession could be seriously harmed as the industry continues to evolve.
That's a fascinating and important point you touch on. I think one of the interesting things, and I appreciate you mentioned this idea that many of us are old enough to remember that there were things called paper invoices, and there were things called paper checks. Shawn, there are some people out there who have no idea what a paper check is. An acquaintance needed some help, so I flew in and helped him out in Vegas yesterday, and I was leading a conversation to about 20 owners and entrepreneurs of diverse firms. And one of the guys in there made a comment kind of similar to yours. And another gentleman in the room looked at him. He's like, had this blank stare. And I'm like, hey, Devin, could you explain to Andy what a check is? He's like, it's this piece of paper that's like money.
Is it that?
Oh man, Andy's laughing. He's like, I've heard my parents talk about it. I mean, he's sharp, really sharp guy. It's phenomenal digital business. But he's like, I've never seen one of those things.
Isn't that amazing how much things have changed? Yeah.
I mean, it was 20 years ago. That's what you're talking about. And you look at the savings and the ability to allow that go from 12 FTEs that are literally doing paper-based processing of check payment and migrate that to digital files and then allow them to do higher value work because they're no longer handling literally paper reconciliation.
Exactly.
And then transcription errors. I mean, come on.
We at WAMU, we used to have to send those invoices in an inter-office mail envelope. People don't even know what that is. Where it's got the big envelope with the little stringy thing on it, and you write your name over here, and then you cross out the one before, and then you write where it's going, and the mail stop code, and then you put it in the bin, and it gets overnighted. I mean, it's almost funny to think about how we operated. That's only 20 years ago.
That is amazing.
Yeah. The other day I was, my children are, they grew up in an era, that was technology centered, but we were talking about taking the phone off the hook and they didn't understand that, and I thought, in the old days, taking the phone off the hook was how you put your house on do not disturb.
Oh my God!
Take the phone off. It's crazy to think about that we had all those interesting and unique challenges that they're just not even relevant today.
Oh, not even. I mean, Shawn, I can only imagine the image in your kids' mind, in the images that your kids might come across when you maybe explain the joy of being able to get a phone cord that allowed you to be more than like 2 or 3 feet away from the base of the phone. And it might be like 15 or 20 feet. Now you could actually go to another room and there was almost like a clothesline hanging across the room as you stretch the cord to the receiver. You're talking like, what do you mean? I talk and walk wherever I want. I'm like, oh goodness, that's a recent innovation.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's so different. So different.
Fantastic. Speaking of innovation, so you were promoting this use of a thing called email, which is, interesting in and of itself, might be coming to its own end. And they're concerned about how do we get color photos of properties. So how did that continuing conversation around technology advance as it related to the whole collateral experience?
It was at the bank. It was a challenge. It was internally. Obviously, we were all on board with let's change, let's innovate, let's adopt new technology. But with all things, there's a lot of different parts that had to come on board. So one of the main things that had to come on board was the appraisers had to be able to deliver the appraisal to in an electronic file format to the system. And so at the time that Washington Mutual wanted to receive the appraisals in this format, well, there was a lot of pushback from the industry. So one of the things that had to happen was our chief appraiser at the time basically had to put the mandate out and just said, you know what, as of this date, if you want to do business with Washington Mutual, you need to deliver in this format.
I see.
So by doing that, because WAMU was so big and we had enough leverage, that forced the forms vendors at the time to get on board, so to speak, and enabled the appraisers to do that. And of course, there was a lot. It didn't happen overnight, and it took a lot of time. But getting the forms filling tools to be able to create the electronic files and deliver them was a big deal, And then for us, another innovation it almost seems silly, but where we couldn't get a data file, like in a wholesale scenario where we'd get a PDF,
yes,
we had to do OCR, optical character recognition, to turn the image files into data. We do that today.
We do it regularly, but for people that don't know OCR, and even when you tell them it's optical character recognition, what literally is that process? Because it's a fascinating technology.
It is taking a machine who basically looks at the pixels of the photo and interprets what letters are there, and then basically guesses what the letters are, and then presents that the way we did it. We presented the machine's interpretation of what letters might be on the page over on another screen.
Yes.
And then a human being would look at that, correct the errors, and so forth, and then finalize it, which would basically create the data file that the systems need to run their automated flows. So it was
amazing.
It's crazy. What's crazy, Michael, is that there's still a lot of lenders that use that tech.
Are you kidding
today?
Oh my God.
It's just amazing how much our industry has evolved, but hasn't.
Yeah.
Not just for appraisals, but for loan files. So it's still a thing out there. But anyway, those were, to getting the appraisers on board, to creating those files was a big deal. And then even more so was internally to trust the system's automated checking. So the whole goal of the system was to create an exception-based workflow. And by that, I mean, instead of looking at every appraisal the same way every time, you would use the tool to find the appraisals that had the highest risk characteristics. So out of 100 appraisals, 25 really might need to be looked at, and the other 75 are low risk, and you can validate that the data and information is good. But so the system was about finding those 25 high risk appraisals and putting those in front of the reviewers at the bank versus spending time reviewing every single appraisal that just didn't need to be reviewed. So that internally, people didn't trust the system. Like, I want to look at everything. We've had to that took some time. But then once people realize, hey, this thing's doing way better than I could do.
Yes.
It's more consistent. It's more objective. We trust it, and then you evolve the flows. So that was fun to see the evolution of that over many years.
That's a great point you touched on, and I can remember when unrelated, but there's connection to it. The whole idea that people's natural activities could be aggregated, and then as a result of their natural activities in the form of spending could be tracked. You could aggregate that data, and then you could make inferences that would generate a very high degree of certainty, prove out the confidence level for someone's ability to borrow and repay. Of course, we know it now as credit scores, but that same idea of starting with like, hey, we're going to look at some data and hey, it's going to work. And they're like, no, it's not. That's not really the case. And in a different but very similar way, you're speaking to that same approach.
Exactly. And part of the vision of the folks that were at these companies was to do the same type of thing that you just referred to with credit, with the collateral valuation.
Got it.
So, AVMs were in their very, very early stages back then. And clearly the data and technology was far less than is now. However, they were still valid in certain cases. So if you say that I think everyone would agree that there's a use case for when that type of technology or approach to valuation makes sense. And, we can debate another time whether it was misused, but the ability to create those models, the scoring, is an incredibly important part of the innovation, because it allows us to do a better job and to understand the risk more effectively. So it's one of the things that's unique about, I think, the way our system works, that we can have these extremely low rate loans over a 30-year period guaranteed.
Yes.
Because the lenders are able to understand the risk very well around the collateral, around the borrower. And that's because of the data that we're able to aggregate and bring together. And, it just makes sense. We can do, as you mentioned before, there's a lot of far higher value activities we can deploy our human workforce on, our limited capital of human beings to do, versus, looking at a page of data and saying, is this a good or a bad decision?
Yes.
That's too subjective, and human beings are far too volatile, for lack of a better terms. You can have a good day or a bad day, and that can affect how you underwrite a loan. But the systems are not that way. And so there's a you can tell I'm very big and heavy on the where technology fits. And I think where I think we should spend our energy is not about whether or not it fits. It's about where it does fit, right? If I look at the industry today, I get frustrated when I see appraisers pushing back on the innovation that the Fannie and Freddie and others are pushing. I'm not saying they're getting it all right.
Yes.
But what I am absolutely saying is pushing back doesn't make any sense to me, because it's more about, okay, how do we use this tech properly? How do we understand this properly? What's the role of the appraiser where it makes the most sense? There's a lot of fussing about, should should we have other people collecting data versus the appraiser? Well, clearly the data collection is not the highest value activity for an appraiser with their analysis skill set. So to me, it's about making sure that the appraiser is well positioned with the tech tools to do that analysis and add that value to the equation versus some of the data collection concerns that I think are less important.
I think that's a great point you raised, and I appreciate now, as we've heard from some other peers as well, having a sense of, hey, I got exposed to this information, I got exposed to this set of market participants, and that there's so much more going on than the little piece that maybe I started with. And then, as you pointed out, like, hey, I'm not really a fortune teller, but I observe things, and I see that technology is going to be a piece of this, and I'm going to take a choice of my time and my resources to invest in myself. And you went and got your master's degree in information systems because you saw that technology was going to be an integral part, and you've stayed in that space. How has your perspective of the industry continued to evolve over the last 20 years, if you will? Because from where you started and getting that degree to where we're at now, I mean, technology has massively moved. Appraisal, not so much, but nothing.
Yeah. That's a really, I'm happy to answer that question. As I mentioned, working at the bank was the first real exposure to the big picture, to how it all works, to how a loan's made, to how a bank works, where the money comes from, how the bank makes money, how the bank loses money, those kind of things. That was tremendous. And at the same time, that also gave me an exposure to the industry whole. How does the industry work? What are the rules for becoming an appraiser? What are the rules for appraising?
Yes.
That for me at that point in my career early on, it was just an absolute blur as to what matter, where the rules came from. Everybody say, well, Fannie says this, Freddie says that, FHA. It's like, it was just a big giant morass of confusion for me anyway.
Yes.
And it wasn't easy to just go to the internet and Google, Fannie selling guide. You couldn't figure this stuff out. And so it was a world of rumors and traditions and, people thinking they knew what they did, but they was outdated. So that was very educational to me.
Mm-hmm.
And as I left the bank eventually, and eventually ended up working for FNC as a tech company.
Okay.
That started in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And that was exciting for me because, again, I wanted to be on the forefront of technology innovation in this space.
Yes.
And so I had that opportunity as FNC had not only installed systems at the Washington Mutual, but was installing systems at many of the other largest lenders. And so it was exactly where I wanted to be. So I was fortunate to have that opportunity. But the other thing that did was that because of FNC's broad perspective across multiple lenders, they were involved at the industry level with the Appraisal Foundation, the Appraisal Subcommittee,
yes,
the Appraisal Institute, all of those different industry groups that were shaping the future of collateral valuation. And they would work with their lenders to be in compliance with regulatory concerns. And so that was the next real epiphany for me, was around how it all works and how to influence that process and have a voice or an awareness of how the next layer of industry and regulation and policy making took place. And so that's where I first got exposed to working with the Appraisal Foundation as part of the Industry Advisory Council that CoreLogic was a member of. With Industry Advisory Council is a group of for-profit companies that are able to work together to help council, as it were, the Appraisal Foundation's independent boards,
Yes,
the AQB and the ASB, on how to successfully implement policies or changes or whatnot, for the good of the industry. So that was a really great opportunity to see how that all worked, and especially over the last 20 years to see the industry grapple with how the technology changes were going to come into play, and how they affected things, and how the world of data, in 2000, it was such a concern about the data and the rights to the data and the ownership of the data, and the fear of the data being used to eliminate the need for appraisals. Clearly, that hasn't happened.
no,
And
not at all.
and then as the UCDP portal came online with Fannie and Freddie and the UAD approach, which was essentially what FNC had done 10 years earlier, it was just now done on an industry-wide scale to see how that changed the industry and as affected what we can and can't do as an industry. So it's been really fun to see those changes, and fortunately for me, I've been able to be involved and hopefully make things better for everybody by being as part of those entities and in those conversations, so to speak, that are trying to shape things and make things work better in the future.
I appreciate you sharing some of that perspective that a lot of people, as you touched on, starting out maybe independent or starting out with a small firm, may have no real sense. I mean, they have some required courses they have to take and some continuing education that they either begrudgingly participate in or maybe enthusiastically approach, so they want to expand their skills. But your story, as a number of the other chief appraisers we had an opportunity to talk to over the seasons have touched on, is getting a sense of what's possible and then pursuing that, and then ultimately being in a position where you get to help shape the future as opposed to just be beholden to it. And I think that's a fascinating experience. What, as you've ascended through different roles and you've really touched a number of the different pieces of the industry. A lot of people don't know FNC, so I appreciate you touching a little bit on who they are and kind of that backbone experience that they provided in a number of cases in the industry. What do you know now at this point in your career, a couple decades in, that you kind of wish you would have known early on? Maybe somebody who, like you in Salt Lake City, is kind of getting started, maybe because dad had mentioned it to him or their neighbor, or they walked into a bank and saw a sign. And you're like, man, had I known some of these things, that would have contributed to my professionalism or my competency or my credibility.
I would say the thing that I learned the most is that there's an incredible need for individuals in this profession to get involved in the profession at the level of the trade associations, the Appraisal Foundation, the local groups, the state boards and regulators. There's just a tremendous amount of need for involvement for people that care about the industry, and I don't mean people that want the industry to stay exactly like it is, but it's about having people be involved that want to make it better and drive it forward.
Yes.
I think that's probably the thing I wished I'd have done more younger. I think when I first started, going to the Appraisal Foundation meetings, I was in my early 30s, and I'd look around the room and there wasn't anybody that was my age in the room. And
I've heard that from a couple people already. Myself,
and I would be like,
I'm so familiar.
even now, I'm still on the young side sometimes when I'm in those meetings. It feels like, but there is a need and a desire and an opportunity to be involved. And I think I always thought, I don't know enough. I'm not the things I know or have experienced are not going to really help. Well, I think I was absolutely wrong.
Got it.
And there's a need for people to be involved, and especially for me as I got more involved, I realized that the unique perspective I had on technology was significantly critical to be understood, because not everybody understood how these things work. And it's one thing to talk about a change to an appraisal process, but if you don't understand how that change affects all of the downstream technology systems and lenders and secondary market systems, you can, the best laid plans can go awry, or they'll just changes that you think will help won't ever be utilized because they don't fit into the world we live in. They're short-sighted or ignorant of things that need to happen, or of how things happen, I should say.
That's a fascinating perspective that a number of people know and probably are giving you a high five and a thumbs up along the way. But for a lot of people, they're like, who, me? Can I have any influence? Can I make a difference? And I hope they hear that the answer is absolutely yes. Your voice matters. Your voice.
Absolutely. There's a dearth of people that have, I think there's a dearth of people that are willing to make that commitment and to do it with a good of the industry mentality. There many are, don't get me wrong, but I think the more the better. The more the better.
Yeah, definitely the case. One other thing that would be fascinating for people to gain some appreciation for, and that is, you started out where you started out in Salt Lake City. You've ascended to a role of a chief appraiser for a major firm in the industry. What are the type of things that you have to deal with today that you didn't even probably know existed in the 90s? You're like,
oh yeah.
The list is awful long, but what are a couple of things to give some people some perspective? What it looks like the day in life of Shawn Telford, chief appraiser.
I don't even know where to start on that one, Michael. I'm very fortunate to have this role at CoreLogic. It's, CoreLogic is a large corporation with many different components that touch many different parts of the industry, from MLSs to appraiser software to data that's used by the insurance industry, to platforms used by lenders to process appraisals. We have interests in the UK, in Australia. We produce appraisal, AVMs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're just a huge variety. And, my role is different than the traditional chief appraiser in that I'm able to be involved across all those different industries. I'm not in the transactions of the business, so to speak. I'm in the opportunity to help our company understand the critical nature of the appraisal process, to understand the rules and regulations of the appraisal process, and probably most importantly, to help our clients help our teams understand how and why our clients need the things they need. We produce technology and platforms that go into the nation's largest lenders.
Mm-hmm.
If the better we do that, obviously it's good for our clients.
Yes,
of course it's good for us, but it's good for the industry. And so, I have an opportunity to help our teams understand how appraising works. So I'm every day dealing with questions that come in from a technology team about, why is a client asking a question about the transaction dollar limit on a licensed appraiser's license? Like, well, because they want to make sure they don't assign an order that's inappropriate to that individual. And so that's just one of 1,000 different things that come into play. But, I have a chance to work with our company, and as we work with the GSEs, with Fannie and Freddie, appraisal modernization, our clients as they adopt appraisal modernization, that kind of umbrella term. There's so much going on in the next few years that the industry is still figuring out, how does the new UAD get implemented? What does the new non-form process look like? How are we successful there? How do we help our lenders to take advantage of all these new and different products that are out there? Because whether the lenders want to use them, that they're beneficial, and so those are the kind of things I get to be involved with. So I get to talk to people like you about the industry, about CoreLogic. I get to work with our outreach to make sure people understand CoreLogic's capabilities, of course, but really just generally help our clients and help our internal folks know how they can best serve our needs, and help see what's coming down the pipe so we're ready and we maximize our opportunities as a company. But of course that we help our clients to be in compliance, to be effective, and all those fun things.
That's a far cry from Measure and a little Rambler. I mean, my goodness.
Sure is. Yeah, I'm not trying to, it's I miss to a certain degree. I miss that type of work, but I love the fact that I get to take that knowledge and experience I have, as well as my technology understanding, and help our teams of young tech developers who've never even bought a house, to understand the critical importance of the appraisal and of the data, and how that information is used by the lenders to help somebody buy a house, and why it matters, and so on and so forth.
Wow. Well, right before we get to our final question, maybe the second to last question would be, again, given all that you've had experience and exposure to, for people that have maybe been in the industry for a little while, what encouragement or insight might you offer them about how many more opportunities there are? I mean, your profession, as we've had the privilege of hearing from some other individuals that have ascended through the different ranks, if you will, of valuation and appraisal. There's so many positions out there, but what might be one or two guiding steps you might offer, especially now, given the market conditions that we're in and people maybe have a little more time on their hands?
For me, education has been a key to opening doors. The choice I made to go back to school and get the master's degree in information systems not only gave me an education, but it showed, it gave me credibility to speak to those things in the world. And so, and I've also continued my education. To me, that is a huge benefit to opening doors, because even though we can learn things and be very intelligent without the education, the formality of completing the education process and the general nature of that education, to me, has been tremendous, especially as I've done that while I've been in my career. Every time I sit in a course or a class, and I can think about the work problems I'm dealing with around a profit and loss scenario, or a product development scenario, or whatever, it opened my eyes to new and different opportunities. I can bring that back to the company and say, hey guys, here's some ideas, and it makes the whole company better as we move into that. The other part that I would push everyone towards is, you've got to get an understanding of technology. And I don't mean, how to use WhatsApp or YouTube or TikTok. What I mean is, how does technology really work? Behind all of the development, and I don't mean you need to learn to write code,
Sure.
but if you can understand how technology works, how databases work, how information is transmitted across the internet, and the security protocols and layers, and if you can get that foundational understanding of how technology works, you can find ways to deploy it to solve the problems that we're dealing today. Because the customers and the marketplace out there will always be innovating and thinking of new ways to do this. People are always going to want to buy homes. That's not going to change.
Yes.
And banks are always going to want to make money by lending money.
Yes.
And they're always going to want to reduce their risk. So the way we assess risk today is not the way we're going to do it in 10 years. And if you don't figure out how to utilize those tools that are now out there that are being developed, you will go by the wayside. And that's, for me, appraising really needs to hone in on the value that we bring, because even the best programmed artificial intelligence cannot process data as fast or as effectively as the human brain.
Yes.
And that's something that I don't know that that'll change in our lifetimes. Who knows? But that's a value that we can bring to the equation that will help ensure the longevity of the profession of appraising, is to focus on those kind of things, because before we know it, the tech to gather data at a house or a neighborhood will be entirely automated. You can see it coming, right?
Yeah.
So those things I don't think we need to focus on, but there are opportunities, of course, to use tech to take advantage of the changes the industry is going down. So again, but education to me, understanding technology at the level of how do I deploy it and use it to solve problems. That, to me, those are things that I would drive everyone towards, whether you know nothing about technology now, or you know a lit or a lot or a little, a lit or a lot.
We're all the way with you there, Shawn.
Yeah. So anyway, if you know just get involved in those things and push yourself. There's no way that will be detrimental to your career, to have a good, solid understanding, so you're not relying on other people to tell you how it works. Figure it out for yourself.
I think that's great words of wisdom. And in our concluding question, we always like to pose, and that is, given everything you've been exposed to, Shawn, all that you've seen, all that maybe you're involved in now, as you look out over the next several years, what are you optimistic or hopeful about?
I am optimistic that the changes that we are seeing and feeling and can see will be good, that they will be positive, that they will be beneficial. That doesn't mean that we'll all like them and that they won't affect the way we operate our lives and work each day, but I believe that they will be generally good in nature. And it's important that, to me, if we see things that way, then it's easy to get involved and shape them.
Yes.
If they start to get in the wrong direction or they start to get off track, you can get involved because you have the experience. And specific to appraising, you understand the appraising process. If you have an understanding of the technology, which is going to be at the core of the future changes, you can help shape that. And especially if you're involved at the local level, at the national level, with the different boards, councils, different industries and trade associations, you could help shape things to the point where the good is maximized, and we end up in a better position that at the end of the day, in the residential world, it's all about helping people get into homes, at least for the most part. There's a lot of other work in appraising, of course, but the part that I'm most familiar with is the mortgage process, and helping people get into homes and helping lenders do that more effectively and with less expense. That's just good for everybody.
Yeah, I get that. Well, Shawn, I appreciate it. Thanks for spending a little bit of an hour with us and a little bit of perspective and what it was like there being in the valley and in the foothills all the way up to kind of rising up a little bit of the mountain there from a standpoint of the view on the valuation profession and just collateral in general and how it fits into such a bigger industry, even though we focus primarily just on appraisal. That's phenomenal. Again, want to say thanks for joining us. It's been a fascinating episode. We appreciate it, Shawn.
Thank you, man. I'm always happy to talk about an industry I'm passionate about, and of course talk about myself.
Well, and that's the goal here. It's the industry is the industry. There's a lot of other places to hear perspective on topics that we intentionally don't cover. But it's that path that a person pursued that provides a little bit of perspective for others to gain maybe some insight, some encouragement, maybe even some inspired action. And I know I'm talking about moving their, yapping their lips, but like moving their seat. That
I hope so.
Tomorrow that isn't going to come about today if nothing changes. So
one last saying that a good friend of mine, he always says, people don't move when they see the light. They move when they feel the heat.
Man, it's like a law of thermodynamics. I used to work for a gentleman who was in the military, and he always liked to share his law of thermodynamics. He said the first law of thermodynamics is if the heat's on you, it's not on me.
I like it.
Different take on that, but nonetheless the same. It
gotta move. You gotta move.
Right, it's about the heat. I love that. Gotta move. Well, friends, thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Perusings, The Power of Values. We're grateful and appreciative of Shawn and his perspective. Please continue to like the podcast, share it out. It's fascinating. Literally, people around the world are getting this and just expressing their appreciation for learning, for gaining some insight. And most of all, it's like, I never would have met that guy. Probably never will. Or never met that lady. Probably never will. But wow, to hear the steps they took. Didn't even know that was possible. So shine a little light and hopefully a little heat along the way. Well, with that, we're going to bring this episode to a close. And until the next one, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Perusings, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Perusings, Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.